a Cambridge-educated revolutionary, sits in his study at dawn, editing articles calling for the violent overthrow of British rule. Police surround his house, pistols drawn, ready to arrest him for masterminding a bomb plot that could cost him his life. Sri Aurobindo Goze, brilliant intellectual, newspaper editor, the supposed architect of terrorism against the British Empire in colonial India. When those officers stormed through his door on May 1st, 1908, they thought they were capturing a dangerous criminal. They had no idea they were about to create one of history's greatest mystics. Here's what makes this story so extraordinary. Aurobindo was completely innocent of the charges. The bomb plot? He had nothing to do with it. The murder conspiracy? Pure fabrication. Yet when those pistols pointed at his chest, something inside him recognized the divine hand orchestrating this entire drama. Look at the absurdity. The British Empire, in all its arrogance, thought they were punishing a rebel. Instead, they were delivering a soul to its ultimate destiny. Aurobindo himself would later write that the compassionate Lord removed all obstacles from his path in one stroke, brought him to a yoga retreat, and stayed as both guru and companion. What yoga retreat? A British prison. Now hold that contradiction in your mind for a moment. How does a stone cage become a sacred sanctuary? How does persecution become the greatest blessing? Because consciousness recognizes no difference between a palace and a prison when awakening to what you truly are. They threw him into Alipore jail, 9 feet long, 5 to 6 feet wide, no windows, a metal plate that spun like a whirling dervish every time he touched it. One bowl for eating, bathing, and everything else. Tepid water in a tin container during blazing summer heat. 2 coarse blankets on a stone floor. Complete solitary confinement for 1 full year. The authorities designed this to break him. Instead, something broke through him that they could never comprehend. After days of mental agony, terror of losing his sanity, Aurobindo found himself barraged by an endless stream of thoughts. The mind lost control, thoughts became incoherent, and he stood on the edge of complete psychological collapse. Any rational person would have shattered under this pressure. But here's what nobody tells you about consciousness. When the personal self reaches its absolute limit, when it can no longer maintain the illusion of being in control, space opens for something vast to enter. Aurobindo called upon God with desperate intensity, praying for protection from losing his mental balance. What happened next changed everything. A great peace descended upon his mind and heart. A cooling sensation spread through his entire body. He experienced what he could only describe as lying on the lap of the World Mother, like a child with complete security. From that moment, his suffering in prison evaporated. The power that poured into his being was so immense that all subsequent hardships were met with unshakable calm. Now comes the part that sounds impossible. Aurobindo looks at the jail walls that separate him from the world, and suddenly they're not walls anymore. They're the divine presence surrounding him protectively. He walks under the tree in front of his cell, but he doesn't see a tree. He sees Krishna standing there, holding shade over him like a loving friend. He looks at the iron bars, and again, the eternal self standing guard, watching over him, He lies down on those coarse prison blankets, and he feels the arms of the divine around him, the embrace of his beloved. But here's where it gets really wild. He looks at his fellow prisoners, thieves, murderers, the dregs of society according to conventional judgment, and he sees the same divine consciousness looking back at him through their eyes. Wait, this sounds like spiritual fantasy, right? Seeing pretty visions to avoid harsh reality? Here's what makes this different. These so-called criminals started showing him kindness and humanity that put educated society to shame. The divine was teaching him something that shattered his previous understanding. That consciousness doesn't discriminate. The same eternal self that appears as saints also appears as sinners. Judgment belongs to the limited mind, but recognition belongs to awakened awareness. When they brought him to court, he looked at the magistrate. Not the magistrate anymore, but the divine sitting on the bench. The prosecuting counsel trying to have him executed. The cosmic beloved sitting there, smiling at him. The man whose job was to argue for his death sentence became the divine friend playing a role in his awakening. Can you imagine? Every enemy becomes a teacher. Every persecutor becomes an instrument of grace. The divine spoke to him directly. Now do you fear? I'm in all beings, and I control their actions and their words. My protection remains with you. This is where most spiritual teachings lose their power. They become abstract philosophy. But Aurobindo lived this recognition. When you truly see that one consciousness appears as all beings, fear disappears. Not because you're pretending everything is fine, but because you see the cosmic intelligence orchestrating every detail. Here's the cosmic joke that reveals everything about true freedom. The British Empire deployed all its resources to destroy one man's influence. Courts, judges, prosecutors, prison walls, armed guards. Massive institutional force focused on crushing a single individual. And the result? He discovered his identity as infinite consciousness that no institution could ever touch. The authorities had the power to control his body, restrict his movement, threaten his life. But they discovered something every tyrant throughout history eventually learns. Consciousness cannot be imprisoned. When they locked him in that stone cell, they thought they were limiting his influence. Instead, they removed every distraction that had been preventing his complete awakening. No social obligations, no political meetings, no external demands. Nothing but the raw encounter between individual awareness and the cosmic intelligence that creates all existence. The fellow prisoners became his first disciples without realizing it. Hardened criminals found themselves inexplicably drawn to this quiet man who radiated something they had never encountered. Even the prison guards began treating him with mysterious reverence, though they couldn't explain why. Here's what makes this transformation so extraordinary and so accessible to anyone facing difficult circumstances. Aurobindo didn't become free by changing his external situation. His situation remained unchanged. Stone walls, iron bars, the constant threat of execution. He became free by recognizing what he had always been, consciousness itself, temporarily playing the role of a limited individual. The prison that was meant to punish him became the ashram that liberated him. When he was supposedly free in the outside world, he was bound by endless desires and attachments. When physically imprisoned, he found absolute freedom. But this wasn't spiritual consolation or making the best of a bad situation. Aurobindo experienced something far more radical. He saw through the fundamental illusion that freedom depends on external conditions. True freedom exists as the very nature of awareness itself, the space in which all experiences appear and disappear. The man who walked into that jail was Sri Aurobindo Ghose, Cambridge graduate and revolutionary leader. The being who prepared to leave was entirely transformed, someone who had touched the source of existence and would never be the same. His declaration, "The British government's wrath," had but one significant outcome. I found God. Here's the final teaching that transforms everything. You're not a person who occasionally has spiritual experiences. You're consciousness itself, temporarily having the experience of being a person. And when you know this directly, every prison becomes a temple, every persecutor becomes a teacher, and every limitation becomes a gateway to unlimited recognition. The stone cell didn't give him freedom. It removed everything that was hiding the freedom he already was.